The worst mistake I ever made was almost beating Lucien Hale. That realization hit me exactly 4.2 seconds after the final buzzer sounded in the Harvard Crest National Collegiate Debate Championship, standing beneath stage lights hot enough to melt dignity, with 3,000 people packed into the auditorium and millions more watching online. I'd spent 3 years clawing my way up from scholarship kid with thrift store blazers and caffeine dependency to the one person on campus who could actually threaten Lucien Hale's spotless empire. Lucien, with his old money smile, razor-sharp suits, and the kind of icy calm that made professors stutter and rivals transfer schools. Lucien Hale, golden boy of Whitmore Law Academy, heir to a political dynasty, undefeated debate captain, and unfortunately for my blood pressure, the most infuriating man I had ever met. And for one glorious, reckless moment, I had him. Your argument, I'd said into the microphone, my voice steady despite my pulse trying to fist-fight my ribcage, is polished, privileged, and fundamentally hollow. The crowd lost its collective mind. Gasps. Laughter. Actual applause. For me, Ethan Mercer. I saw it happen, the smallest crack in Lucien's expression. Not anger. Not embarrassment. Worse. Interest. Like I'd stopped being an inconvenience and become something worth hunting. Then Lucien adjusted his cufflinks. That was my first warning. My second was when he smiled. "Mr. Mercer," he said, smooth as aged whiskey and twice as dangerous, for someone so determined to dismantle my case. "You seem to have forgotten to secure your own." Oh no. No, no, no. The next 6 minutes were a masterclass in public destruction. Lucien didn't just counter my argument. He unraveled it, thread by thread. He quoted my own prior research, flipped my strongest point against me. Then, because apparently humiliation was his cardio, used my scholarship platform speech from freshman year as the final blow. "You once said truth matters most when it costs you something," he reminded me, blue eyes locked on mine like a sniper with perfect posture. "So tell us, Ethan, what did your truth cost today?" Silence. Deafening, soul evaporating. Silence. And just like that, I lost. Not by much. Which somehow made it worse. Because losing badly would have been easier than standing there, 1 point behind Lucien Hale, while the entire country watched him prove that almost defeating him was still losing to him. Cameras flashed. Reporters swarmed. My social feeds detonated before I even left the stage. But through all of it, through the humiliation, the fury, the very real temptation to fake my death and move to rural Montana, Lucien did something unforgivable. He leaned in as we shook hands, his grip firm, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "You almost had me." My stomach dropped. Because that wasn't mockery. That was a promise. Then his thumb brushed once against my wrist. Brief, deliberate, impossible to misunderstand. "Next time," Lucien murmured, standing too close for someone who'd just professionally ruined me. "Don't hesitate." And God help me, I didn't know if he meant the debate. By sunrise, I had been transformed from promising underdog to nationally televised cautionary tale. Which, for the record, was not how I had planned to spend my Wednesday. My phone had not stopped vibrating since 7:03 a.m. group chats, debate forums, 3 separate alumni newsletters, 1 truly unhinged Reddit thread ranking my public unraveling on a scale from tragic to oddly attractive. I threw my phone face down on my dorm mattress and seriously considered dropping out, changing my name, and opening a bait shop somewhere in Minnesota. Instead, because the universe enjoyed my suffering, I had constitutional theory at 9 a.m., which meant exactly one thing: Lucien Hale. Whitmore Law Academy was not a campus. It was a gladiator arena disguised as Gothic architecture. Towering stone buildings, ivy-covered walls, trust funds, and tailored wool coats. And this morning, every single person seemed to part just enough when I walked by to remind me they had absolutely seen my academic assassination. Whispers followed me up the marble steps like designer perfume. "That is Ethan Mercer. He almost won. Lucien destroyed him. Almost." There was that word again. I hated that word. I had just reached my locker when Savannah Pierce, student Senate darling, future Supreme Court aspirant, and one of Lucien's many orbiting admirers, appeared beside me with the sympathetic smile of someone arriving at a funeral she had definitely RSVP'd yes to. "For what it is worth," she said, adjusting her silk scarf like she was preparing to deliver a eulogy, "you were very brave." I stared at her. Did you just compare me to a war casualty? No, she said carefully. More like an unfortunate but compelling historical event. I blinked once. You know what? Fair. She patted my shoulder and disappeared into class, leaving me alone with my wounded pride and a violently overpriced coffee I had no memory of purchasing. You are holding that cup like it personally offended you. I froze. No, absolutely not. I turned slowly, already knowing. Lucien stood 3 feet away, immaculate as ever, navy cashmere coat, silver watch, posture like he had been handcrafted by a committee devoted exclusively to intimidation. He held a legal pad in one hand and my last functioning nerve in the other. What do you want? I asked, which came out more defensive than intended. Lucien's gaze flicked to my coffee, then back to me. To point out, he said, calm and infuriating, that if you squeeze any harder, you are going to wear it. I looked down. He was not wrong. Thank you, I deadpanned. Your concern sustains me. To my horror, one corner of his mouth tilted upward. Not a full smile. Worse, a private one. You should be more careful today, Mercer. My sarcasm sharpened instantly. What? Afraid I will challenge another national institution before lunch? No, Lucien said, stepping closer. Just slightly, but enough that my traitorous brain noticed the cedar and citrus scent of his cologne and filed it somewhere deeply inconvenient. I am afraid, he said quietly, that after last night, people will assume you are vulnerable. The hallway noise seemed to dim. And? I asked. Lucien's expression did not change. And Whitmore is full of people who confuse public loss with private weakness. There it was again. Not mockery. Not cruelty. Something stranger. A warning. Before I could respond, his hand moved, fast. Precise, brushing lint from my lapel. Innocent. Technically. Except his fingers lingered half a second too long, and suddenly breathing felt like a group project I had not prepared for. Try not to let them, he murmured, voice low enough to sound almost personal. Mistake one for the other. Then he walked away. Just left, like he had not detonated a small psychological device directly in my chest before first period. And the truly horrifying part? For the first time since losing, I was not thinking about the debate anymore. If there was one thing Whitmore Law Academy loved more than prestige, it was blood in the water. By Thursday afternoon, I had become a campus spectacle with cheekbones. Not because I lost. No, Whitmore respected failure when it was dramatic enough. The real issue was that I had survived Lucien Hale's attention, and apparently that made me interesting in ways I had absolutely not consented to. I noticed it first during advanced ethics, when Professor Holloway paired us for a semester-long judicial corruption case study. 38 students. 38 horrified faces. One deeply cursed seating chart. Mr. Hale and Mr. Mercer, Professor Holloway announced, adjusting his glasses with all the emotional sensitivity of a tax audit. Given your spirited intellectual history, I expect exceptional work. Spirited intellectual history. That was one way to describe our dynamic. Another was psychological warfare in expensive shoes. I did not even have time to protest before Lucien slid into the seat beside mine like destiny had a sense of humor and excellent tailoring. Congratulations, I muttered without looking at him. Your reputation for academic terrorism has officially become institutionalized. And yet, Lucien said smoothly, setting his leather folio on the desk with surgical precision, you still sound surprised. I hated how calm he always was. Not robotic. Worse, intentional. Like every word, every glance, every measured inhale had been vetted by an internal board of directors before reaching the public. Meanwhile, I was one inconvenience away from becoming performance art. Class had barely begun when Professor Holloway distributed case files from prior student Senate financial audits, thousands of dollars in scholarship funds, event grants, and donor contributions. Standard academic bureaucracy. Dry, soulless. Until page 17. My stomach dropped so fast I thought gravity had developed a personal grudge. A familiar name sat buried in a reimbursement approval chain connected to off-campus networking retreats. Theodore Barron, Student Senate Treasurer, Campus Kingmaker, son of a federal judge, human embodiment of a yacht catalog. More importantly, the same Theodore Barron who had spent the last year publicly implying scholarship students like me were diversity investments with Wi-Fi. My eyes narrowed. Something about the numbers felt off. Quietly off. The kind of off that wore a Rolex and donated libraries. Do not, Lucian said beside me. So suddenly and so quietly, I nearly levitated. Make that face unless you are prepared for consequences. I turned sharply. What face? The one where your moral outrage overrides self-preservation. Excuse me? I do not have a face for that. Lucian finally looked at me then. Really looked, blue eyes cutting straight through my denial with terrifying efficiency. Mercer, he said, almost tiredly. It is your most recognizable feature. Which, rude. Also annoyingly accurate. I glanced back at the report, pulse picking up. Duplicate vendor payments. Inflated lodging receipts. Anonymous discretionary transfers. It was subtle, but not subtle enough. This is fraud. I whispered before common sense could tackle me. Lucian's jaw tightened. Not dramatically, just enough to suggest several deeply inconvenient things. Yes, he said. One word. Controlled. Flat. Dangerous. I blinked. You knew? I suspected. And you did nothing? His expression sharpened, not defensive, offended. I did not say that. Before I could push further, Theodore himself strolled into class 20 minutes late wearing a navy blazer, inherited arrogance, and the unmistakable confidence of someone who had never once been told no by life or mirrors. His gaze swept the room lazily, then landed on me. Not unusual. People had been staring all week. But this felt different. Deliberate. Assessing. Like my sudden proximity to Lucian had shifted me from nuisance to variable. Theodore smiled. It was polished. Public. Empty. Mercer, he said pleasantly, taking the row ahead of us. Heard you nearly made history. I smiled back with all the warmth of an IRS letter. And yet somehow, disappointment remains your strongest legacy. A few students choked on laughter. Theodore's smile thinned. Lucian, to my absolute horror, made a small sound beside me. Not quite a laugh. More dangerous. Approval. Theodore turned forward, but not before saying softly, Careful, scholarship boy. Some losses echo longer than others. Silence. Tiny. Sharp. Wrong. And for the first time all week, Lucian did not look amused. He looked still, which, I was rapidly learning, was far more terrifying. The first rule of uncovering corruption at Whitmore was apparently simple. Do not do it alone, and absolutely do not do it while emotionally compromised. Unfortunately for me, I was both. By 8:47 that night, I was in the South Archival wing of Barrister Hall armed with a student ID, a legal pad, and the kind of reckless curiosity that had shortened life expectancy throughout history. The old records office was technically open until 9 p.m., but Whitmore's definition of open felt less like accessibility and more like an elaborate dare. Dim brass lamps, endless rows of filing cabinets, mahogany shelves lined with enough institutional secrets to destabilize governments or at least ruin a few Senate elections. I should have gone back to my dorm. I should have ignored Theodore Barron's warning, minded my scholarship-funded business, and accepted that rich people had been laundering respectability through paperwork since the invention of signatures. Instead, I was 3 spreadsheets deep into Student Senate reimbursement archives muttering, "Oh, that is suspicious," to myself like a financially literate cryptid. And it was suspicious. Repeated shell organizations. Retreat expenses tied to non-existent events. Leadership summits, billed at luxury resorts during weeks when half the attendees had documented finals. It was not just corruption. It was lazy corruption. Expensive, arrogant, barely concealed corruption, which somehow offended me more. I am genuinely starting to understand why people in power fear you. I jerked so hard, I nearly launched a file binder into another century. What is wrong with you? I hissed, spinning around. Lucian stood at the end of the aisle in a charcoal coat, one hand in his pocket, looking maddeningly composed for someone who had apparently mastered teleportation. Do you materialize exclusively to shorten my lifespan? Only when necessary, he said, stepping closer beneath the amber library light. And tonight seemed particularly necessary. I exhaled sharply. Let me guess. You are here to tell me this is dangerous. No, he glanced at the open files. I am here because you ignored the part where dangerous people do not enjoy being audited by insomniac scholarship students. Excuse me. First of all, I whispered aggressively. That was one time. And second, are you seriously criticizing my methods while lurking in shadows like a morally ambiguous Batman? Lucien's mouth twitched. Actually twitched. Batman had better boundaries. There should have been a law against him being funny without warning. Relax, I muttered, turning back to the documents. I am just gathering evidence. Ethan. My name. Not Mercer. Not scholarship boy. Ethan. Low. Precise. Entirely too effective. I froze before I could pretend otherwise. You are not gathering evidence, Lucien said quietly behind me. You are standing in a building funded by the same families you are investigating, after hours, alone, without considering surveillance, retaliation, or political fallout. I turned, ready with something sarcastic and devastating, then stopped. Because Lucien was closer than before. Not touching, never careless, but close enough that the space between us felt curated. Deliberate. Like even proximity was something he weaponized. You think I cannot handle myself? I asked, lifting my chin. His gaze dropped to it for half a second before returning to my eyes. No, he said. I think you can. The answer hit harder than doubt would have. That, he continued, voice quieter now, is usually when you become most reckless. For one deeply inconvenient second, I forgot how arguments worked. Then the overhead lights flickered. Once. Twice. Footsteps echoed faintly from the far corridor. Not students. Too measured. Too many. Lucien's expression changed instantly. Not panic. Calculation. His hand closed around my wrist before I could process it. Warm. Firm. Immediate. Do not argue, he said. And because my life had apparently abandoned realism altogether, I listened. He pulled me smoothly between two shelving rows just as voices drifted into the archive room. Theodore. I would have recognized that polished arrogance anywhere. I do not care who accessed it, Theodore was saying coolly. Find out. My pulse slammed against my ribs. Lucien shifted in front of me without hesitation, subtly blocking the narrow gap between my body and the aisle. Shielding. Not dramatic. Not performative. Just there. One hand braced beside my shoulder against the shelf. The other still steady at my wrist. Breathing suddenly became a complicated legal issue. Theodore's footsteps came closer. Then closer. I barely inhaled. Lucien leaned down, his voice so low it was almost part of my own pulse. For once, Mercer. His breath ghosted near my ear, calm as a loaded secret. Let someone protect you. It turns out survival feels a lot like standing motionless in a dark archive at 9:03 p.m. while your academic nemesis cages you between antique law journals and a shelf labeled donor ethics reports, which frankly felt ironic enough to qualify as satire. I could hear Theodore Barron's shoes against marble. Slow. Controlled. Entitled in a way only generational wealth could produce. Each step landed like a countdown I had absolutely not agreed to participate in. My pulse was so loud I was halfway convinced it should qualify as an audible confession. Lucien, meanwhile, remained infuriatingly calm. Of course he did. Because apparently Lucien Hale had been handcrafted in some elite laboratory where they replaced panic with custom tailoring and impossible self-control. Someone accessed the reimbursement logs from Section C. One of Theodore's friends muttered from somewhere too close for comfort. Then Section C, Theodore replied, voice smooth and clipped, would be the logical place to start. Oh, fantastic. Logic. We were being hunted by logic. I instinctively shifted backward, approximately half an inch, before Lucien's hand at my wrist tightened. Not painfully, not possessively, just enough. Stay? It was ridiculous how clearly I understood that without him saying a word. My back pressed lightly against old oak shelving. Lucien adjusted instantly, his body angling with terrifying precision, blocking me more completely from view. The movement was subtle, efficient, but the effect? Catastrophic. Because now there was nowhere my attention could go except the impossible reality of Lucien Hale being inches away, one arm braced near my shoulder, his coat brushing mine, his steady breathing somehow louder than my constitutional rights. This was deeply unfair. You look like you are about to either argue or pass out, he murmured, barely audible. I glared up at him, which was difficult considering the circumstances and his deeply inconvenient height. I am multitasking. I felt, rather than saw, the faintest shift in his expression. Try silence, he whispered. Excuse me. Rude. Also, before I could formulate a proper response fueled by indignation and suppressed adrenaline, footsteps stopped directly outside our aisle. Directly. Outside. Clear this row, Theodore said. Silence. Then movement. File drawers opening. Papers shifting. Closer. Every nerve in my body lit up like bad decisions on election night. I had exactly one thought. This is how I die. Not dramatically. Not heroically. Just discovered beside evidence of financial misconduct while trapped in a bizarrely intimate legal thriller with my rival. Theodore stepped closer. One more turn, and he would see us. Then, suddenly, Lucien moved. His free hand lifted, not quickly, not chaotically, and adjusted my tie. My tie. In the middle of imminent exposure and probable social ruin, this man had the audacity to fix my tie. I stared at him in silent outrage. He ignored me completely. His fingers smoothed the knot once, precise and unhurried. Then his head dipped slightly closer, as if we were simply too entitled. Private school disasters having a tense, but aesthetically pleasing moment. There, he said softly, with the kind of casual intimacy that should have been illegal without prior warning. You were crooked. My brain fully departed the premises. Because I realized it exactly when Theodore appeared at the aisle entrance, glanced in, and stopped. Lucien did not move away, did not explain, did not flinch. He simply looked over his shoulder with cold, aristocratic boredom, one hand still near my collar like this was normal. Like I was normal. Like we were, not a scandal, but a certainty. Theodore's eyes flicked between us. His suspicion shifted. Not gone. Recalculated. Baron, Lucien said smoothly, each syllable carrying enough old money authority to rewrite lesser men's decisions. Unless your sudden interest in archival policy extends to interrupting my evening, I suggest you keep walking. The silence that followed could have funded therapy. Theodore's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. My mistake, he said finally. But it was not to me. It was to Lucien. Then he left. Just left. Footsteps retreating. Voices fading. The threat dissolved like smoke. I exhaled so hard I nearly became spiritual. Did you just? I started, staring at him once the corridor fell silent. Lucien stepped back exactly one pace. Enough to restore oxygen. Not enough to restore sanity. Yes, he said, maddeningly composed. I did. You used me as camouflage. No. His gaze dropped briefly to my still perfect tie, then returned to my face with devastating steadiness. I protected what was mine to protect, and I really hated how my heart forgot whose side it was on. By 8:12 the next morning, my life had officially become a conspiracy theory with excellent tailoring. I knew this because the second I stepped onto Whitmore's main quad, conversation stopped with the subtlety of a car crash. Not all at once. That would have required dignity. No, it happened in waves. Glances. Double takes. Whisper chains traveling faster than campus Wi-Fi. One sophomore literally walked into a stone bench while staring at me. Why, I muttered to my coffee, do I suddenly feel like a minor scandal in loafers? Because, Savannah Pierce said, materializing beside me with the unholy timing of someone who treated gossip like cardio, you were seen. I stopped walking. Slowly. Carefully. I am sorry, I said, already fearing the answer. Seen doing what exactly? Savannah's expression contained the kind of pity usually reserved for courtroom documentaries and people who text their ex after midnight. In Barrister Hall. After hours. With Lucien. I choked on absolutely nothing. That is wildly misleading. Is it? She asked, arching one perfect eyebrow. Because according to half the political science department, Lucien Hale had you pinned against legal archives looking either threatening or romantic, and frankly, eyewitnesses are divided. Oh good. Fantastic. My educational institution had become a Victorian fanfiction forum. He was hiding me from Theodore, I hissed. From corruption. From being caught. Savannah blinked once. You hear how that somehow sounds worse, right? Before I could explain that, no. Actually, there had been spreadsheets and fraud and deeply non-romantic panic. A familiar voice cut smoothly through my unraveling. Pierce. Savannah straightened like someone had just announced federal oversight. Hale. I closed my eyes. No, absolutely not before breakfast. Lucien fell into step beside me with maddening ease, like appearing exactly when my nervous system least needed him was a personal hobby. Gray wool coat. Navy tie. Silver cufflinks. He looked less like a student and more like the board of trustees had assembled him in a private chamber to intimidate the lower classes. Mercer, he said calmly, glancing once at the coffee in my hand. You are 2 minutes from spilling that. Thank you, I said flatly. Your surveillance continues to enrich my life. Savannah, traitor that she was, made a suspicious choking noise that sounded a lot like suppressed laughter before abandoning me entirely. Coward. Walk with me, Lucien said. Not a request. Not quite an order. Worse, an expectation. Do I have a choice? Technically. I hated that answer immediately. Unfortunately, I walked. Because despite my better judgment, my body had apparently developed a deeply concerning habit of cooperating when Lucien used that tone. The quad buzzed around us, but now the whispers had evolved. Not louder, sharper, curious. Students noticed distance. And right now, Lucien Hale, Whitmore's untouchable golden prince, was walking beside me like it was the most natural thing in the world. Congratulations, I muttered under my breath. You have successfully ruined what little social anonymity I had left. Incorrect, Lucien said. You lost anonymity when you challenged me publicly. I glanced at him. And what exactly am I losing now? He looked ahead, expression unreadable in that deeply offensive way he always managed, like his thoughts belonged behind legal counsel. That, he said after a beat, depends on whether Baron believes what he saw. My stomach dropped. Right. Theodore. Fraud. Corruption. The reason my life had become academically adjacent espionage. He did not, I said quietly. Believe it, I mean. Lucien's gaze flicked to me then. Brief. Sharp. No, he said. He believed enough. We turned the corner toward Holloway Hall when a group of student senate executives approached from the opposite direction. Theodore at the center, like privilege, had formed a committee. My spine immediately prepared for nonsense. Theodore's eyes landed on me, then on Lucien, then on the exact 3 feet of space between us. His smile was polished poison. Mercer, he said pleasantly. Glad to see you made it home safely. Oh, so we were doing veiled threats before 10 a.m. bold. I opened my mouth, fully prepared to weaponize sarcasm, but Lucien beat me to it. He usually does, Lucien said smoothly. Then, because apparently my blood pressure had not suffered enough this week, his hand touched the small of my back. Light. Brief. Guiding me forward past Theodore like this was instinct. Like protecting me was not strategy, but habit. Come along, Lucien said, calm as judgment, and somehow more devastating. You are going to be late. The silence behind us was nuclear. I forgot how oxygen worked for a full 2 seconds. Because Theodore was no longer looking at me like prey. He was looking at me like territory someone else had already marked. And the truly terrifying part? I was beginning to understand why. By Friday, I had developed 3 deeply inconvenient problems. First, Theodore Baron was watching me like I had accidentally wandered onto a chessboard I did not know I was standing on. Second, half of Whitmore now believed Lucien Hale and I were engaged in either political warfare, secret blackmail, or an aggressively attractive enemies-to-lovers subplot. And third, arguably the most humiliating, I was starting to notice things. Tiny things. Dangerous things. Like the fact that Lucien always walked on the side closest to stair rails in crowded halls. Or that he somehow appeared whenever Theodore's circle did. Or that his version of leave it alone sounded less like dismissal and more like someone trying very hard to keep me from becoming collateral damage. Which was absurd. Obviously, Lucien Hale did not care about me. He tolerated me. Strategically. Like one might tolerate a highly verbal raccoon that kept uncovering tax fraud. You are staring at him again, Savannah said over lunch, stabbing her kale salad with the grim determination of a woman who distrusted joy. I nearly inhaled sparkling water. I am not. Ethan, I am observing. Savannah did not even look up. That is just scholarship boy code for emotionally panicking with eye contact. Rude. Painfully accurate, but rude. I glanced, strictly against my will, across the faculty dining terrace where Lucien stood in conversation with 2 constitutional law fellows and 1 state senator's daughter who looked engineered by old money and expensive vowels. He was, naturally, immaculate. Dark overcoat. Crisp posture. That infuriating calm. He looked like he belonged on the cover of a magazine called Wealth, Power, and Emotional Unavailability. I hate him, I muttered. Savannah finally looked up. No, sweetheart. You are confused by him. Which, honestly, seems worse. Before I could deny that with the conviction it deserved, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Normally, I ignored unknown numbers on principle and survival instinct. This one contained only a photo. No text. No explanation. My stomach dropped so fast it should have. Required legal supervision. It was me. Last night. In Barrister Hall. Standing partially obscured behind Lucien in the archive aisle. His arm braced near my shoulder. My tie in his hand. The angle made it look intimate. Not scandalous. Worse. Intentional. Below the image was one message. Careful who protects you. I went cold. Not dramatic fear. Not panic. Something sharper. Awareness. Savannah's expression changed instantly when she saw my face. Ethan. Do not. I said quietly, standing too fast. Do not make this louder than it already is. Who sent that? I do not know. Which was technically true and emotionally false because Theodore's polished menace practically signed the thing in gold embossing. My chair scraped back. I needed air. Space. Distance from public places and private dread. I barely made it halfway down the east colonnade before a hand closed lightly around my elbow and redirected me into an empty faculty alcove so smoothly I did not even process resistance until the door clicked shut behind us. Lucien. Of course. Show me, he said. No greeting. No preamble. Just that same terrifyingly calm authority. How did you? Your expression, he said flatly. I have seen it before. Excuse me? That should not have done what it did to my pulse. I handed him the phone. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly as he read the message. Not anger. Worse. Calculation. Delete nothing, he said. Forward it to me. Lucien, now Ethan. There it was again. My name in that tone. Sharp enough to cut through spirals. Steady enough to stop one. I did it. Because apparently my autonomy had left the chat. Lucien's thumb brushed my wrist when he handed the phone back. Brief. Grounding. Entirely too deliberate. Listen carefully, he said, stepping closer. Not invasive, not careless, but close enough that his certainty started to feel dangerously like shelter. Baron is escalating because uncertainty makes men like him sloppy. My throat tightened. And me? For one fractured second, Lucien's expression shifted. Not strategist. Not rival. Something more personal. More dangerous. You, he said quietly, are exactly why I told you to stop doing this alone. Then, his hand moved, straightening my collar like this was normal, like I was not unraveling, like he had any right to soothe what his presence complicated. From this point forward, Lucien said, voice low and absolute. If someone wants access to you, they go through me. And the truly catastrophic part? For the first time, that did not sound like a threat. By Saturday morning, Lucien Hale had become a problem I could no longer categorize under rivalry, corruption, or inconveniently symmetrical bone structure. He was now a full-scale atmospheric condition. Constant. Pressurized. Somehow everywhere. It started at 7:10 a.m. when I left my dorm for an emergency caffeine run looking like academic decline in sweatpants and a wrinkled Whitmore hoodie, only to find a black coffee waiting outside my door. Not on the floor. Not abandoned. Resting neatly on the windowsill beside a folded note in infuriatingly elegant handwriting. You have mock trial prep at 8. Drink this before you embarrass yourself. No signature. Because of course there was not. There did not need to be. I stared at it for a full 10 seconds. Then another 5. Then, because my self-respect had apparently entered witness protection, I drank it. You look disturbed, Savannah observed later that morning from across the library table, where she was color-coding policy briefs like an emotionally stable serial killer. I found coffee outside my room. She blinked. And this is concerning because it was from him. Savannah went completely still. Then, with all the reverence of someone witnessing divine intervention, she slowly closed her laptop. Oh, she whispered. Oh no. That is exactly what I said. Except I had said it internally, while clutching caffeine like it might explain why my chest had done something deeply theatrical. The Whitmore Grand Library should have been a sanctuary. Towering windows. Marble columns. Silent scholarship. Instead, it had become the setting for my psychological deterioration because Lucien was there too. Obviously. 3 tables over. Reviewing appellate law with the effortless poise of someone whose ancestors had probably invented precedent. I tried not to look at him. I failed immediately. You are doing it again, Savannah muttered. I am not. Ethan. I am conducting visual threat assessment. You are staring at his hands. I choked on oxygen. I hate you. No, she said, not even glancing up from her notes. You hate that I am right. Before I could launch a morally justified rebuttal, my laptop screen flickered, then froze, then abruptly shut down. No, I whispered. No, absolutely not. My research, my notes, my carefully compiled financial discrepancies. Gone. Or at least temporarily swallowed by technology's deep personal vendetta against me. Please tell me you backed it up, Savannah said carefully. Silence. Ethan, I would prefer not to be judged during this difficult time. She closed her eyes like she was praying for my soul or my basic competence. Move. A new voice. Calm. Familiar. Catastrophically composed. Lucien. I did not even hear him approach, which frankly was becoming a serious security issue. I have it, I said immediately, because pride is a disease and mine was terminal. Lucien looked at the dead laptop, then at me. Then, with the exhausted patience of a man confronting an intelligent but self-sabotaging legal hazard, he sat beside me. Beside me. Not across. Not nearby. Beside. His shoulder brushed mine once. Light, accidental, probably meaningless, and my nervous system reacted like someone had set off fireworks in a law journal. You are hovering, I said faintly. You are panicking, he replied. One of us should remain useful. Savannah made a sound suspiciously similar to a muffled scream before abruptly standing. I suddenly remembered I respect myself, she announced, gathering her things. Good luck with whatever deeply repressed Victorian courtship this is. Then she left. Traitor. Lucien, to his credit, did not even blink. He simply reached for my laptop, sleeves shifting just enough to reveal the silver edge of his watch. Password. Absolutely not. He looked at me. Just looked. Ethan, you cannot just say my name like due process does not matter. Password. You are insufferable. And yet, he said, one eyebrow lifting as his fingers lightly nudged my hand off. The keyboard with terrifying ease. Here we are. Reader, traitorously, I gave him the password, which was humiliating enough before he paused, glanced at me, and said, Your password is Baroness Fraud? I went cold. Lower your voice. Lucien's mouth twitched. Actually twitched. Subtle. I was upset. Clearly. 10 minutes later, my files were restored, encrypted, and duplicated onto 3 separate secure folders I had not known existed. How did you even do that? I asked. Lucien handed my laptop back, his fingers brushing mine for half a second too long to classify as accidental and far too briefly to call intentional. Mercer, he said quietly, returning his attention to his own case file like he had not just restructured my digital life and emotional stability in under 15 minutes. There are very few things in this world I do not prepare for. I should have let that go. I absolutely should have. Instead, because self-preservation remained more theory than practice around him, I asked the dangerous question. And was I one of them? Lucien went still. Not awkward. Not surprised. Still in that terrifying way that suggested truth had just entered the room uninvited. Then, without looking at me, he turned one page in his notebook and said softly, long before you noticed. There are certain moments in life when your entire understanding of reality quietly packs a suitcase, leaves through the front door, and never returns. Mine arrived at 11:46 p.m. on a Saturday in the Whitmore Grand Library Archives Annex, wearing reading glasses I did not own and carrying enough emotional instability to qualify as a federal concern. It should have been simple. Lucien had left 23 minutes earlier after saying, with his usual maddening calm, do not stay past midnight. Which, naturally, guaranteed I stayed. Not because I had a death wish. Because I had questions. Specifically, what in the deeply unconstitutional hell did long before you noticed mean? I told myself I was only there to keep investigating Theodore's financial records. This was technically true in the same way setting off fireworks in a courtroom might technically count as self-expression. My laptop was open. My coffee was cold. My common sense had once again abandoned me for safer employment. I had been cross-referencing donor disbursement forms when I found it. Not in the Senate files. Not in Barron's records. In a mislabeled scholarship review archive from freshman year. My freshman year. At first, I almost skipped it. Then I saw my own name. Ethan Cole Mercer. Merit Review Appeal. Date, August 14th. 3 years ago. My stomach tightened. I clicked. And suddenly, Everything changed. The document was an internal administrative chain. Scholarship committee recommendations. Housing disputes. Emergency fund evaluations. Most of it was bureaucratic enough to induce unconsciousness. Until one thread stopped me cold. A flag notation from admissions financial oversight. Candidate may present exceptional rhetorical potential, but background instability could impact institutional optics. Suggested deferment pending private donor reassessment. I stared. Once. Twice. Then my pulse began to pound so loudly I could barely hear my own thoughts over the sound of my entire life developing trust issues. Deferred? No. No, that was not possible. Whitmore had accepted me outright. Full scholarship. Housing included after my father's medical bankruptcy. I knew because I had cried in a bus station bathroom for 20 straight minutes when the letter came. My hands shook as I scrolled further. Then I found the override. Authorized immediate reinstatement by private legacy intervention. No donor identity disclosed. Attached note. Whitmore does not discard brilliance because it arrives without pedigree. I stopped breathing. Because beneath that sentence was a digital authorization seal. LHW Lucian Hale Whitmore. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because sometimes your brain malfunctions when confronted with emotional arson. No. I whispered to absolutely no one. No. Absolutely not. Lucian. Lucian had intervened in my admission file? Before orientation? Before debate nationals? Before we ever met? That was impossible. Insane. Deeply suspicious and frankly inconvenient to my long-standing commitment to resenting him properly. I opened more files. Housing reassignment approval after my dorm flood sophomore year? Anonymous override. Debate travel grant when my sponsorship vanished junior year? Private fund reallocation. Medical emergency extension after my father's surgery? Confidential administrative pressure. Every single impossible break I had barely survived at Whitmore had one invisible fingerprint. LHW, you were not supposed to find that tonight. I froze so hard my soul briefly left my body to file legal objections. Slowly, I turned. Lucian stood in the archive doorway, coat off, sleeves rolled once. Expression unreadable in that terrifyingly calm way that usually meant my life was about to become emotionally noncompliant. You knew I would keep looking, I said, my voice sharper than I intended and far less steady than I wanted. Lucian did not deny it. Of course he did not. He just stepped closer, gaze fixed on the open screen, then on me. I knew, he said quietly, that eventually, you would stop assuming you arrived here alone. Excuse me? No, absolutely not. My chair scraped back. You manipulated my life. No, for the first time since I had met him. Lucian looked something dangerously close to offended. I prevented other people from deciding it for you. Silence. Heavy. Fractured. Why? I asked, because suddenly that question felt older than this week. Older than rivalry. Older than us. Lucian's jaw tightened, not with anger, restraint. Because, he said carefully, like the truth itself required precision. I read your entrance essay when I was 16. I blinked. Once. What? The scholarship board circulated it as an example of political rhetoric from non-traditional applicants. His voice remained maddeningly steady. Mine did not. You read my essay. Yes. Before meeting me. Yes. And then what? Lucian's gaze held mine with devastating, terrifying honesty. And then, he said softly, I made certain Whitmore did not lose you before I had the chance to. There should be laws against learning the boy who made your life unbearable had also quietly been holding it together behind the scenes. Federal ones. With penalties. Because at 12:04 a.m., standing in Whitmore's archive, annex under dim brass lights and institutional betrayal, I was experiencing what medical professionals would likely classify as a full-scale emotional systems failure. That, I said finally, because apparently eloquence abandons you when your rival casually reveals he has been covertly altering your destiny since adolescence, is deeply unsettling. Lucian, naturally, had the audacity to look calm, not smug, not defensive, just composed, like he had not just informed me that my acceptance, housing, grants, and approximately 70% of my academic survival had been strategically safeguarded by the same man I had spent 3 years publicly trying to defeat. You are angry, he observed. Oh, excellent. Nothing escaped him. I am furious, I corrected. There are layers. Lucien nodded once, as though my outrage was both expected and entirely reasonable, which somehow made it worse. Then be furious. Excuse me? I stared at him. That is your response. Would you prefer dishonesty? He asked, stepping closer. Not enough to corner. Just enough to remind me that Lucien Hale approached confrontation the way generals approached war maps, intentionally. You asked why I was there. I answered. No. I snapped, because if I did not interrupt him, I might accidentally process things. You answered like this is normal. Like secretly intervening in someone's life before meeting them is not deeply concerning behavior. For the first time, Lucien exhaled. Not annoyed. Not cold. Tired. Which, frankly, was somehow more destabilizing. Ethan, he said quietly, and I immediately resented how my nervous system still recognized that tone as danger and safety all at once. I did not choose your life for you. You interfered. I removed barriers deliberately placed by people who decided your background mattered more than your mind. His voice sharpened, not louder, but precise in that terrifying way truth becomes when it no longer cares if you are comfortable. There is a difference. Silence hit hard enough to bruise. Because the worst part? Some part of me knew he was right. Whitmore had nearly discarded me. Not because I lacked merit. Because I lacked pedigree. Lucien had not created my brilliance. He had prevented powerful people from burying it, which would have been easier to process if he had not also spent the last 3 years provoking me like intellectual foreplay with a superiority complex. Then why the rivalry? I asked, the question ripping out before pride could stop it. Why humiliate me? Why challenge me constantly if you were what? Protecting me. Lucien went very still. And suddenly, the air changed. Less archive. More confession booth with expensive architecture. Because, he said carefully, Whitmore notices conflict before it notices quiet excellence. I frowned. What? You were brilliant from day one, Lucien said. And there it was again. That infuriating habit he had of saying catastrophic things in the tone of someone discussing weather patterns. But brilliance alone would not have kept their attention. Not here. Not in rooms built by legacy. You needed to become impossible to ignore. My heartbeat forgot how rhythm worked. So you made me your rival. Not a question. A realization. Lucien did not look away. Yes. I actually laughed again, but this one came fractured. Sharp-edged. You turned me into your personal academic adversary, as a strategy? I turned you into the only person on campus no one could dismiss, he said. There is a difference. Oh, I was going to develop 17 new trust issues. Do you hear yourself? I demanded. You orchestrated 3 years of psychological warfare. I debated you. Lucien corrected, which was somehow worse because technically, infuriatingly, he was not wrong. I challenged you publicly. I pushed you harder than anyone else would have dared. I made certain every room that respected me had to respect you. I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing coherent arrived. Because memory, traitorous, devastating memory, started rearranging itself in real time. Every scholarship panel Lucien challenged me in. Every internship board where he publicly countered my arguments only to force faculty to engage them. Every impossible standard. Every sharpened confrontation. He had not been destroying me. He had been elevating me. Through chaos. Like an emotionally unavailable lunatic. That is, I said faintly, the most unhinged mentorship style I have ever heard of. And to my absolute horror, Lucien's mouth curved. Small. Private. Dangerous. I was not trying to mentor you. My pulse stuttered. Then what were you trying to do? For one suspended, terrible second, Lucien Hale, Whitmore's untouchable, impossible, meticulously controlled Lucien, looked at me with something so honest, it almost felt unfair. Stay close, he said. Just that. 2 words. Soft enough to miss. Heavy enough to rewrite history. And suddenly, I no longer knew which was more terrifying. The fact that he had built our rivalry on purpose, or that some reckless, fractured part of me was beginning to understand why. Sunday arrived looking deceptively peaceful, which should have been my first warning. Whitmore's campus glowed beneath early autumn sunlight, all amber leaves and Gothic spires, and wealthy ambition pretending to be education. Students drifted between stone courtyards in pressed wool coats and inherited confidence, laughing over brunch plans and case law, like my entire psychological framework had not been detonated 12 hours earlier in an archive annex by a boy with impossible cheekbones and catastrophic emotional restraint. I had not slept. Not really. Oh, physically, yes. I had technically been horizontal for 6 hours. But mentally, my brain had spent the night sprinting laps around one horrifying truth. Lucien Hale had not entered my life by accident. He had curated his proximity like a long-term legal strategy with feelings, which was absurd, disturbing, deeply flattering in ways I refused to examine without supervision. By 10 a.m., I was seated in Whitmore's West Courtyard with Savannah, 2 coffees, and what she had delicately labeled the face of a man experiencing enemies to lovers against his will. I hate that phrase, I muttered. You hate that it applies. It does not. Savannah took one slow sip, her expression serene in the way only truly dangerous women achieve. Ethan, he protected your scholarship before meeting you, engineered your academic visibility, safeguarded your financial aid, monitors your stress, levels through beverage placement. At this point, if he starts carrying an umbrella over your head, I will personally officiate. Please never say officiate again. Before she could continue weaponizing accuracy, my phone buzzed. Then buzzed again. Then approximately 17 more times in under 10 seconds. That, Savannah said ominously, is never good. She was correct. It was not good. Because overnight, someone had leaked internal Senate reimbursement files to the entire student body. Anonymous source. Itemized corruption trails. Theodore Barron's financial misconduct laid bare in glorious spreadsheet detail. Fake conferences. Embezzled scholarship allocations. Shell organizations. Donor manipulation. My blood ran cold. Oh no. Oh no. Savannah repeated, snatching my phone. Ethan, this is not oh no. This is institutional arson. She was not wrong. The campus around us was already shifting. Clusters of students whispering. Faculty moving faster than usual. Student Senate officers looked like trust funds under federal investigation. And at the center of the storm? Theodore Barron himself, storming across the courtyard in a navy coat and public fury, flanked by 2 equally expensive disasters. His eyes locked onto me with terrifying precision. Oh, come on. Why is he looking at you like that? Savannah whispered. Because, I said faintly, standing on pure survival instinct. My life hates me. Theodore reached us in seconds. You, he snapped, polished composure finally cracking. What exactly did you think you were doing? Nearby conversations stopped. Phones subtly lifted. Of course they did. Whitmore loved nothing more than live scandal with attractive participants. I genuinely have no idea which of my many poor decisions you are referring to, I said, because self-preservation had once again abandoned me in favor of sarcasm. Theodore stepped closer. Do not play stupid. I am not playing. I shot back before wisdom could intervene. And if your financial ethics are this fragile, perhaps public records were always going to be your natural predator. Savannah actually whispered, oh my God, like she was watching someone juggle knives. Recreationally. Theodore's expression darkened. You think being clever protects you? No. Came a cold, devastatingly familiar voice from behind me. But I do. The entire courtyard went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence history probably makes before wars or very expensive lawsuits. Lucien. Of course. He stepped beside me with terrifying calm. Not rushed, not dramatic, just absolute. Gray coat. Black gloves. Blue eyes sharp enough to redraw legal boundaries. He did not ask if I was all right. Did not hesitate. He simply positioned himself there, shoulder nearly brushing mine, presence like judgment. Theodore's jaw tightened. This does not concern you, Hale. Lucien's response was immediate. Precise. Fatal. That, he said, each word cool enough to frost glass, is where you continue to miscalculate. Then, because apparently my cardiovascular health meant nothing to either of us, Lucien reached up and calmly adjusted the scarf I had very much not realized was half falling off. In front of everyone. Casual. Intimate. Possessive in a way no court could legally define, but every witness understood instantly. You are making a scene, Baron, Lucien continued, not once looking away from Theodore even as his fingers briefly brushed my collar. And I would strongly advise against confusing desperation with authority. Theodore went pale. Not dramatically. Strategically. Because suddenly, this was no longer scholarship boy versus Senate prince. This was Theodore Barron versus Lucien Hale, and every person in that courtyard knew which side of that equation usually survived. Then Lucien glanced at me. Just once. "Ethan," he said, maddeningly calm while my nervous system filed for bankruptcy. "Walk with me. Not can. Not should. Just certainty." And somehow, in front of God, gossip, and Whitmore Law Academy, I did. Lucien Hale did not walk quickly. That was the first thing I noticed as he led me away from the smoking ruins of Theodore Barron's public unraveling and through Whitmore's East Cloister like he had not just casually redefined territorial behavior in front of half the student body. He moved with the same maddening precision he applied to everything else in his deeply infuriating existence. Calm, deliberate, impossible to interrupt, which should have annoyed me more than it did. Instead, I was having the distinct problem of being entirely too aware of the fact that his hand remained lightly at my back. Not gripping, not pushing, guiding. Like this was instinct. Like somewhere along the way, Lucien Hale had decided I was a variable worth steering away from disaster. "Are you going to say something?" I asked the moment we crossed into the old botanical courtyard behind Blackstone Hall, where ivy climbed ancient stone walls and nobody came on Sundays unless they were contemplating philosophy or poor romantic choices. Lucien stopped beside the fountain. Finally, his hand dropped away. The absence was immediate and, frankly, offensive. "I was waiting," he said smoothly, "to determine whether you intended to thank me or accuse me first." I stared at him. You cannot possibly think those are equally likely outcomes. One dark brow lifted. History suggests otherwise. Rude. Also statistically valid. I folded my arms, mostly because if I did not create physical boundaries immediately, my dignity might attempt something reckless. "Did you leak Barron's files?" Lucien's expression did not change, which was answer enough and somehow more infuriating because this man could probably confess to espionage and still sound like a board meeting. "I released public documents proving public misconduct," he said. "That is not the same thing." "Lucien." "Ethan." My name again. Sharp. Calm. Catastrophically effective. "Barron threatened you," he said, and suddenly whatever polished legal dance we had been doing vanished. His voice did not rise. It narrowed. Repeatedly. "I can handle Theodore." "I know." The response came instantly. No hesitation. No doubt. That does not mean I was willing to let him continue. Oh, that was dangerously different. "You do not get to decide that unilaterally," I said, though my conviction had developed noticeable structural weaknesses. Lucien's jaw tightened, not angry, restrained, which, I was learning, was far worse. "No," he said quietly. "I decided that the moment Barron mistook intimidation for access." Silence. Wind stirred amber, leaves across stone. Somewhere in the distance, church bells marked noon like my sanity needed timestamps. "Why?" I asked again, because apparently this had become the defining question of my existence. "Why do you keep doing that?" "Doing what?" "This." I gestured wildly, because precision had abandoned me. Protecting me like I am your responsibility, while simultaneously acting like emotional clarity, is a tax bracket you refuse to enter. For the first time since I had met him, Lucien actually looked caught off guard. Not dramatically, just enough to fracture the myth of total control. "You want clarity?" he asked softly. "Yes," I snapped. "Preferably before I develop a personality disorder." And then, because fate had clearly decided subtlety was for lesser institutions, Lucien stepped closer. One pace, then another. Not invasive. Intentional. The fountain behind me suddenly felt less decorative and more like witness testimony. "Fine," he said. "No arrogance. No polished evasion. Just truth, stripped sharp. I read your scholarship essay when I was 16 and hated that it affected me." My pulse forgot its job entirely. "What?" "I hated," Lucien continued, each word measured like something long contained finally choosing release, "that someone I had never met could write with that much conviction. That you could sound furious and hopeful at the same time. That Whitmore nearly discarded, that because your father went bankrupt instead of belonging to the right family." I could not move. "So yes," he said, voice quieter now, more dangerous for it. I intervened. Another step. Too close. Entirely too close for rational thought. "Then I met you," he said, and whatever remained of my emotional defenses filed immediate resignation. "And you were worse." I blinked. Worse. Brighter. He corrected instantly, like the truth itself offended imprecision. Louder. More reckless. More infuriating. You challenged everything. Me included. His gaze dropped briefly to my mouth, just enough to destroy several constitutional protections, before returning to my eyes. So I made myself impossible for you to ignore. The world genuinely stopped for one horrifying second. You made me your rival, I whispered. No, Lucien said, and his hand lifted, slowly, deliberately, to straighten the edge of my scarf again, because apparently this was simply how he delivered psychological devastation now. I made myself the one person you would never look away from. My breath caught, entirely against my will. Lucien. Being your enemy, he said softly, fingers lingering for one catastrophic half-second near my collar, was the closest I could get to you, until I no longer found it sufficient. And there it was. Not polished, not strategic, not rivalry. Confession, brutal in its restraint, terrifying in its honesty. So if you want clarity, Ethan, his voice dropped, low enough to feel like a secret my pulse was not equipped to keep. I never protected you because I had to. One final, devastating pause. I did it because after meeting you, his thumb barely brushed my jaw, brief, grounding, world-endingly gentle. I stopped considering that a choice. The Whitmore Centennial Gala was, in my professional opinion, a deeply unnecessary event invented by rich people to prove chandeliers could, in fact, have political influence. Every fall, the Academy transformed Blackstone Hall into a cathedral of old money and strategic networking, crystal lights, live strings, champagne towers, and enough generational wealth in one ballroom to single-handedly destabilize small nations. Normally, I avoided it on principle. Unfortunately, this year attendance was mandatory for scholarship finalists, student senate representatives, and anyone unfortunate enough to have recently become the center of Whitmore's favorite scandal. Which meant me. By 7:40 p.m., I stood in front of a gold-framed mirror in a borrowed tuxedo that fit suspiciously well, courtesy of Savannah's terrifying efficiency and zero regard for my emotional peace. You look devastating, she announced, adjusting my bow tie with the severity of a battlefield medic. Like if vengeance got a law degree. That feels aggressive. It is meant lovingly. She stepped back, then narrowed her eyes. And for the love of all constitutional rights, if Lucien Hale looks at you tonight the way he has been looking at you all week, try not to visibly combust in public. I hate you. No, she said serenely. You are terrified I am right. Unfortunately, she usually was. Blackstone Hall glittered like ambition itself. Marble floors, candlelight, string quartets, legacy families drifting between governors, trustees, and legal elites as though democracy had been designed exclusively for their convenience. I had barely made it 6 feet inside before whispers started. Not cruel this time. Curious. Assessing. Because Theodore Barron's resignation from Student Senate had detonated across campus, and somehow, against all odds, Ethan Mercer had survived the fallout looking sharper instead of ruined. Small victories. Mercer. I turned. Theodore. Of course. Former Senate prince. Current cautionary tale. He looked polished, controlled, publicly recovered, which meant dangerous in exactly the way expensive men preferred. Barron. I replied, equally smooth, because if I was going to emotionally collapse tonight, it would not be in front of decorative ice sculptures. Theodore's smile was practiced. Enjoying your sudden elevation? Oh, there it was. The bitterness of a man who had mistaken influence for immunity. Immensely, I said, though I imagine accountability feels less festive. His jaw tightened. Tiny. Satisfying. Careful, Mercer, Theodore said, stepping slightly closer. Whitmore loves making symbols almost as much as it loves destroying them. And there it was again. Threat, dressed like advice. Before I could respond, and oh, I had responses, music shifted. Not stopped. Shifted. The subtle social tremor of a room noticing someone important. Theodore noticed it too. So did everyone else. Lucien. He had arrived. Black tuxedo. Crisp black bow tie. Silver cufflinks. Composure so lethal it should have required licensing. Lucien Hale did not enter rooms. He altered them. Conversation bent. Attention recalibrated. Even Theodore, for one fractured second, looked less certain. Lucien's gaze found mine almost immediately across the ballroom. Not by accident. never by accident. And then, because my life had apparently abandoned moderation entirely, he walked straight toward us. No hesitation, no performance, just certainty in polished shoes. Theodore exhaled once, slow and irritated. Of course, he muttered. Lucien stopped beside me, not between us, beside me, which somehow felt more significant, more equal, more devastating. Baron, Lucien said with smooth finality. Theodore straightened. Hail. Then, before another word could sharpen, Lucien reached up, calmly, casually, in front of trustees, senators, rivals, and half of New England's legal elite. He adjusted my bow tie. Once. Precise. Familiar. Intimate enough to silence a 10-piece orchestra. Your tie was off-center, Lucien said, as though he had not just publicly detonated months of speculation with one devastatingly domestic gesture. I forgot language. Entirely. Around us, silence spread in ripples. Theodore actually went still. Savannah, somewhere across the room, nearly dropped a champagne flute. There, Lucien murmured, his fingers brushing my collar one final, catastrophic second. Then his gaze shifted, not to me, to Theodore. Cold. Elegant. Absolute. You were saying? Theodore, to his credit, understood power when it finally stopped being theoretical. His smile fractured. No, he said after one razor-thin pause. I do not believe I was. Then he walked away. Just like that. No grand finale. No final threat. Because for the first time, Theodore Barron was not facing scholarship boy Ethan Mercer. He was facing the unmistakable reality that Lucien Hale had made a choice so public, so deliberate, even Whitmore's oldest families would understand it instantly. Mine. The thought hit like lightning and stayed like law. You did that on purpose, I whispered once Theodore disappeared into the crowd. Lucien finally looked at me then, not rival, not strategist, not protector hiding behind plausible deniability. Just Lucien, terrifyingly honest. Yes, he said. I did. Why? The question was breath, not logic. His expression softened, not publicly, privately. The kind of softness more dangerous than arrogance because it was real. Then Lucien offered me his hand as the orchestra shifted into the opening bars of the first waltz.